My name is Jason deCaires Taylor, and I am a sculptor that has turned the ocean into my exhibition space, making installations for marine environments which over time transform into living, breathing ecosystems. As part of this year's Oceans Week 2020, I wanted to give you a brief insight into the world of underwater sculpture. I've spent the last 16 years constructing projects across the planet, with over 1,000 sculptures installed in places such as the Caribbean Sea, Atlantic, Pacific and Indian Oceans, under icy fjords in Oslo, and even tidal waterways such as the Thames Estuary in London. Some of the installations exist above and below the waterline, like portals to another world. Designs turn barren stretches of seabed into homes for large schools of fish and marine life. Each of the works explore a different subject, whether that be human migration, our relationship with the natural world, or threats we face such as climate change, habitat loss, and species extinction. The sculptures are constructed using inert, pH-neutral materials designed to attract marine life. Surface textures provide substrate for juvenile coral polyps to attach. Historically, we have always tried to conquer the natural world. I hope my work tries to reset that relationship, to show that we are an integral part of nature, but also that we are ultimately at its mercy. Some of the tidal works change colour according to water temperature and warn of the potential of coral bleaching on the Great Barrier Reef. Others as forms of activism, critical of our dependency on fossil fuels. We are shaped by the sea. Our ultimate survival is dependent on it. My work tries to visualize that fragile and intimate relationship.
All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, depending on where you're tuning in from today. My name is Joe Gorowski. Before we get things rolling for today's session, I just want to give a huge shout out to Jason deCaires Taylor for that amazing video, letting us use it during our Tektite 2020 festival. He's devoted 2 decades to underwater life and its conservation, along with his work as a sculptor and photographer. So amazing work, and absolutely love how seamlessly life can attach to it and grow to it, and it can become a living part of the ecosystem. So it's absolutely incredible. All right. So I'm going to be your host today for the Global Citizenry panel. So over the next hour or so, I am going to be joined by 3 amazing panelists who are inspiring and exciting change both locally and around the world. So we're all global citizens. Every day we're drawn closer by a web of connections, of interdependencies. Our choices and actions impact people and communities locally, nationally, and internationally. So many aren't aware of these global connections, or others choose to ignore them. We're not doing a great job protecting our planet and looking out for its amazing variety of life. We often make decisions with a very narrow, short-term focus that will have lasting negative impacts. But there is good news, and that is that there's a growing movement who are rising to the challenge of this immense responsibility. They're innovating in exciting ways, from democratizing science learning to empowering girls and people of color, to creating technology, businesses, and hackathons that can solve global problems. So myself, as an educator and explorer, I've been working to inspire the next generation of scientists and explorers. So what I've come to realize is that the scientists and explorers themselves are incredible educators. Their passion for their subject matter is unmatched and can't help but draw students in. They're at the front line of pressing global issues and can share powerful firsthand stories and experiences with students. They understand the importance of connecting with the current generation and sharing their work. They can all remember a time when it happened, when their passion for their chosen pursuit was ignited. It may have been meeting someone, an inspirational educator, seeing a documentary, or reading a book. It's these tiny aha moments that I've been striving to spark in classrooms everywhere. And today I want to share a little bit of that with you. So bear with me for just one moment here while I switch to a share screen. All right. Beautiful. So this title is presentation, the title Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, and you're going to understand why in just a moment. So I always like to start every presentation with sharing why I do what I do, and it's for these characters here. So there's my wife, Liz, and then my two kids, Finn is 7 and Nora is 3. So they're my inspiration and keep me doing what I do. So I was an educator for about 7 years. I taught math and science. I'm also an explorer at the National Geographic Society and a fellow. And we're going to talk a little bit about my latest pursuit in a moment. So this is what I love to do when I am not teaching. It's getting underwater, exploring the underwater world. I've been diving since 2007, always looking for new places and things to see and explore and kind of push the limits of what I can do underwater. Now, my story starts in Australia. I just graduated from biology and zoology at the University of Guelph and had no idea what I wanted to do, but my future wife knew she wanted to be a teacher and she wanted to learn in Australia. So who could turn down that opportunity? I went along with her and bartended and traveled for a year. And that's when I realized I want to share my passion for the natural world, for science, for what we're doing to our planet with the next generation. But after a couple years, I realized I wasn't the type of teacher I wanted to be. Too much pen to paper, too much relying on the textbook. I started to feel like that guy on top, and I'm pretty sure my students were starting to feel like those students in below. I knew I had to do something to shake things up and impact my students in a more meaningful way. And happily enough, like we're talking about living underwater with Tektite, this is another area, Aquarius, the reef base. And I read an article that summer that Fabien Cousteau, Mission 31, he'd be living and working underwater for 31 days, following in his grandfather's footsteps. So what I saw as well is he'd be Skyping with classrooms, and I knew right away my classroom had to be one of those. But it also got me thinking, if I could talk to a Cousteau at the bottom of the ocean, what else could I bring into my classroom? So we set out on a crazy mission to connect with 50 scientists, explorers, adventurers, and conservationists from all over the world. And we did it. Absolutely incredible. In fact, our 50th event, our 50th exploration was with Fabien Cousteau at the bottom of the ocean during Mission 31, which was pretty wild. So a few other speakers. We've got a Canadian astronaut, Jeremy Henson, hanging out in Antarctica with Jean Pennycook. As kids were asking her questions, the Adelie penguins were looking in the camera and trying to figure out what was going on. We went to an active volcano, Mount Etna, in Italy with an expedition team. We talked to Pal Davidson on a glacier in Iceland to learn all about global warming. And Andrea Marshall, Queen of the Mantas, shared her amazing work that she's doing around the world. So these are the amazing things that I could bring to my students. So I decided to bring it to more students. I launched a nonprofit called Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. The goal of inspiring the next generation of scientists and explorers by bringing science, adventure, exploration, and conservation live into classrooms everywhere. We do that through virtual speakers. We do that through virtual field trips. It's 100% free for classrooms everywhere. So there's a level playing field where there's, aren't classrooms who only can participate once in a while or all the time. Any classroom, anywhere, whenever they want, can take part in these live events. So we do all kinds of amazing events. One of my favorite months is February. Every February, we kick all the men out and we host exclusively women in science and exploration from all over the world, which is always a blast. We just launched the Global Biodiversity Festival. So this was a 3-day virtual festival, 65 speakers from around the world sharing the amazing variety of life on Earth, the challenges it faces, and some good news conservation stories. We had viewers tuning in from over 100 countries. It's a pretty wild 3 days. And then, most of our events will take place from a home, a lab, an office, in the field with a good 4G signal. But we found a way to open up the rest of the world. With these textbook-sized satellite BGAN units, we send them out with the explorers, the scientists, the conservationists, and they can video broadcast live in the classrooms from pretty much anywhere on the planet. So a few little examples here. Top is Clipperton Atoll, one of the most isolated coral islands on the planet. Top of a volcano in Guatemala, the middle of Gabon, down in Antarctica at Port Lockroy, out in California with the sea lions, and then another shot in Antarctica with another crew that brought a unit down for us. In fact, sometimes the BGAN units come back with other things. This is a Maya, my dog, came back from Belize with a team of archaeologists who adopted her as her mascot. So sometimes the satellite units come back with a little something extra. So lots of fun sharing around the world with the classrooms. Students absolutely love joining in and taking part in these events, interacting with the speakers as well as other classrooms live. So all of the events, we have classrooms join live on camera. They all stream live over YouTube, so any number of classrooms or any individual from the public can tune in live, and then they all record. So we've got an incredible library of these events. Here's a fun trip to the Sea Turtle Hospital. We like to take students to the extreme places.
I'm explorer and adventurer George Curators. And when I explore, I do it by the seat of my pants.
We like to take them to the extremely cute. This is Toucan Rescue Ranch in Costa Rica. And we also like to take them to the extreme front lines. So this is Old Pejeta in Kenya. These are the last 2 northern white rhinos on the planet. So imagine the impact that you can have when we broadcast live in the classrooms, these big, beautiful animals, and then the students find out that these are the last 2 of their kind, and it is, our activities that have brought this about. So how does this impact classrooms? I want to share a couple examples today before I introduce our first panelist. This is an example from my classroom. We had a talk with some marine biologists from Sharks for Kids. And in 45 minutes, they flipped a switch. They dispelled all the myths my students held about sharks. And my students realized that sharks have more to fear from us than we do of them. We're taking 75 to 100 million of them out of our ocean every year. After this talk, my students wanted to do something. They wanted to make a difference. We found out there was going to be a shark call in Western Australia, and we started writing a series of open letters to the Premier of Western Australia, who wrote back and dismissed the students' arguments, and my students wrote back to him more. In the meantime, we made global headlines, both locally as well as internationally. So here's a few articles. This is from Guelph, Ontario. Here's another one from Western Australia, and one more example there. We took part in public service announcements and campaigns in Australia, and also made videos for conservation groups. So we're able to reach around the world. I got to see my students become global citizens. I got to see them find their voice and realize they could have an impact even on the other side of the planet. But we wanted to support locally too. So we did some fundraising. We brought those 3 biologists from Bimini to Guelph, Ontario, and had the Sharks for Kids Guelph tour. They visited 8,000 students over a week, and that grew into a yearly guest speaker tour in our board with polar explorers and primatologists and ocean advocates, you name it. So their questioning skills grow by leaps and bounds, and they absolutely love the time they get to interact live with the scientists and the explorers. Their writing, the work that they do afterwards is incredible. It's some of the best writing I've ever seen in other teachers when they're inspired and excited to make a difference. Sometimes you just can't argue with their points. This was in response to a speaker who was an underwater photographer and said she loves every undersea creature but crabs. And so she got a letter full of inboxes of persuasive writing from students why she should give crabs another chance. Some reasons were better than others. But they're motivated to act. They want to make a difference. They want to do fundraisers. They want to do activities. They want to get out in the community, and they want to do something for the organizations, the conservationists that they're introduced to. They don't just want to watch, they want to be part of it. And I want to end off with this. This is one of my favorites. I think it ties in nicely with Tektite and what we're doing. We've done live events from Aquarius before, and this is a kindergarten classroom. They were so excited with their connection live to the Aquarius reef base that they turned their entire classroom into an underwater playground. They were aquanauts. and they lived out their dreams in their Aquarius reef base. So, you know, this is the impacts that's happening. And if we can reach students this young, if we can have them diving down to Aquarius reef base and thinking about the future and how they can protect the oceans, I think we're doing pretty well. So that's enough from me. I want to share a little bit about the work that I do. I think that getting these live interactions into classrooms has such a huge impact. You know, amazing stories, and it's something I'm going to continue to do and continue to bring it to classrooms everywhere. All right, let's come back from that screen share. So now let's start bringing in some of our incredible panelists. I'm so excited to get to chat to everybody live today, and you're going to love meeting everybody. So we're going to start off with Dr. Ayana Flewellen. She is a Black feminist, an archaeologist, a storyteller, and an artist. She's the co-founder and vice president of the Society of Black Archaeologists and sits on the board of Diving with a Purpose. Currently, she's an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of California, Riverside. Her research and teaching interests are shaped by and speak to Black feminist theory, historical archaeology, maritime heritage conservation, public and community engaged archaeology, process of identity formations, and representations of slavery. Ayana, it's so incredible to have you joining us live today. Thanks for getting up a little bit early, and we are ready to dive into some of your work.
Awesome. Let me start by sharing my screen as well to pop open. Here we go. Yeah, thank you again for having me here today. I'm really excited to share more about the work with Diving with a Purpose. I feel like it falls right in alignment with really bringing amazing experiences with STEM to really underrepresented groups in the field. So let's dive in. My name, just to repeat, is Dr. Ayana Omilade Flewellen, and I'm going to share with you today about the amazing work Diving with a Purpose is doing. Diving with a Purpose, and I'll refer to them as DWP throughout this presentation, is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the conservation and protection of submerged heritage resources. DWP provides education, training, certification, and field experience to adults and youth in the fields of maritime archaeology and ocean conservation. DWP has a special focus in documentation and the interpretation of African slave trades, shipwrecks, and maritime history and culture of African Americans who formed the core labor and expertise of America's maritime enterprises. So what makes this organization so unique is how it's comprised predominantly of recreational divers of African descent with no formal training in maritime archaeology or coral reef restoration. DWP has partnered with national and international organizations, gaining professional skills that have afforded them the opportunity to aid in the restoration of coral reefs around the world and the documentation of maritime heritage sites associated with the African and African diaspora internationally. The slogan of the organization is restoring our oceans and preserving our heritage. And the rhetoric within the slogan really invokes a sense of stewardship and stewardship to the natural and cultural environment, which its membership upholds. That DWP divers are environmental stewards of the ocean and cultural stewards of African diasporic material heritage sites. And on the slide right now, you can just see a couple of our core partners, which are too many to really dive into. But DWP, we're a volunteer underwater archaeology program that started with members of the National Association of Black Scuba Divers, NABS, and the National Park Service and Biscayne National Park. Biscayne National Park is the largest marine park in the national park system and has over 110 archaeology sites, approximately 43 of which are intact shipwrecks that tell compelling stories of the nation's rich maritime cultural heritage. The National Association of Black Scuba Divers was established in 1991 by Rick Powell and Dr. Jose Jones. Rick Powell and Dr. Jones were two of the earliest African Americans to become certified scuba divers, and their collaboration resulted in the creation of NABS. And it should be mentioned that Dr. Jose Jones, now 80, still regularly participates in DWP trainings year after year. He also sits on the board of DWP and is an inductee in the Scuba Diving Hall of Fame. So DWP's work really began through the meeting of Ken Stewart, who was the Southern Regional Representative of NAMS, and the late Brenda Lazendorf, who was in archaeology with Florida's Biscayne State Park, through a production of a documentary about the research of a ship that was involved in the transatlantic slave trade called the Guerrero. So Brenda expressed interest in having divers aid in the documentation of wrecks in the park, and Ken Stewart returned to NABS members with an email that said, "Tired of the same old dives? Let's try diving with a purpose." Since then, the organization has trained over 300 divers through their PADI certification course in maritime archaeology advocacy, with 46 participants becoming instructors. The organization as a whole has documented 18 shipwrecks, worked in 6 different countries, and logged over 18,000 volunteer hours. And DWP really offers 3 training opportunities. They have their maritime archaeology program, their coral reef restoration program, and their youth diving with a purpose program. And for today's presentation, I'm really going to focus on the maritime program for both adults and youth. So DWP has worked with the National Park Service, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, and the Slave Wrecks Project, aiding in coral reef restoration and documentation of submerged heritage resources around the world, as well as providing training to divers to carry out specialized work. For the past 16 years, DWP has offered a week-long training, maritime advocacy training program that teaches skilled divers the basics of maritime archaeology survey. And this experience is truly intergenerational. The photo that's on the slide is a picture of me participating in my first DWP experience in 2017, where I worked alongside Gail Patrick, a renowned architect who's in her 70s and still actively diving. She's been diving with DWP for a number of years and actually creates the final product of the maps that all of the explorations recover. So DWP trains experienced divers, including youth, to become underwater archaeology advocates. And through the program, divers are able to assist in the historical documentation and preservation of artifacts and shipwrecks. The program helps to perform a congressionally mandated condition, an assessment of archaeological sites in the park's boundaries. And DWP performs extensive underwater archaeological documentation of these shipwrecks, surveys their condition, and develops detailed maps of the wreck sites. The program also attempts to interpret and understand the historical context in which the ships existed. And DWP believes it's important to document these historical sites while they still exist. These sites are subject to an ever-changing environment, both man-made and natural. And sites have been looted for their valuable artifacts and damaged by storms and time on the ocean floor. The shipwreck data collected serves as vital educational resource for local communities that will tell stories of these vessels and the role they played in the nation's maritime heritage. Documenting these sites allows this rich history to be shared for generations to come. So really following the Maritime Archaeology Training Program, DWP hosted another training on coral reef restoration. Participants learned how to spot various types of coral, document noticeable damage and disease seen on stony corals, and clean and outplant staghorn coral. And founding members of the organization have been diving in Key Largo, where this work takes place, for over 15 years. And during that time, many have seen firsthand the impacts of human pollution and climate change on the ocean, specifically the coral reefs that wrap around the Florida Keys, which have significantly been impacted by stony coral tissue disease since 2014. With the organization, Diving with a Purpose extends to caring for the ocean through ongoing coral restoration efforts. The organization sees coral restoration as a component of maritime conservation that aids in combating the impact humans have had on the sustainability of shallow water coral reefs. And participants from each program earn a PADI certification card at the end of the training. and divers who repeatedly attend DWP Summer Maritime and coral reef restoration training programs can qualify to participate in other ongoing projects that the organization has around the world. One such project is in partnership with the state of Michigan and the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. A small team consisting of DWP members and NOAA personnel assembled in August of 2015 to document an airplane shipwreck in Lake Huron in Port Huron, Michigan. The airplane is one of 14 known plane wrecks in the Great Lakes area that were flown by Tuskegee airmen who trained over the lake before being deployed overseas in the second half of World War II. And the image on the far left and right of the slide show mapping and recovery of efforts for this aircraft. So during the middle years of World War II, Michigan was home to several African-American air combat units, including many graduates of the Tuskegee pilot training program. Upon completion of advanced training in Michigan, many Tuskegee airmen were immediately deployed to combat support missions in Italy, North Africa, and the Mediterranean. 2 Tuskegee airmen planes were discovered in the Michigan area. The airplane recovered in 2015 was flown by Lieutenant Frank Moody, featured on the slide in the center, and was discovered in Lake Huron on April 11, 2014, 70 years to the day of the accident. So DWP is currently working alongside the Port Huron City Council, building educational programming around the history of the Tuskegee Airmen in the area, while also collaborating to fund the creation of a memorial site dedicated to the Tuskegee Airmen in town. For Port Huron members, community members, unearthing the remains of these planes is encased in a desire to highlight the experiences of African-American men and women who lived and labored in Port Huron, Michigan in the early 20th century, a history that's mostly untold in the area. Additionally, DWP is also actively working alongside the Slave Wrecks Project. The Slave Wrecks Project is an international network of researchers, institutions hosted by the Smithsonian's Museum of African American History and Culture in collaboration with George Washington University, Ezekiel Museums of South Africa, the United States Park Service, and Diving with a Purpose that studies the history of the transatlantic slave trade in its wake. DWP's role in SWP has primarily been to aid in the documentation of shipwrecks involved in the transatlantic slave trade. Additionally, DWP has worked to train local monitors in scuba techniques, as well as maritime advocacy, so that local community members have the skills to be stewards of their submerged cultural resources. DWP is currently working with the Slave Wrecks Project in Senegal, Mozambique, and in South Africa. And those were just some of the adult programs that DWP offers. The Youth Diving with a Purpose program provides the same training opportunities for youth ages 16 to 23. And YDWP participants gather at Biscayne National Park and learn underwater archaeology with DWP instructors. The mission of YDWP goes beyond underwater archaeology education, as we are always looking for ways to challenge interest and broaden knowledge related to our vast aquatic environment. And I have this great video that I want to show everyone that really demonstrates this in real time.
Welcome to Biscayne National Park and the Youth Diving with a Purpose program, the first annual Youth Diving with a Purpose program. We are sitting right now on the bottom of the ocean at the site of the outline wreck. It's a 19th century wooden sailing vessel about 150 foot long. And what you see going on around you are a bunch of high school students from all over the country who've come here to the park to get an experience doing underwater archaeology and helping the National Park Service by producing a site plan of the shipwreck that's just below the sand. This is the 10th year that Diving with a Purpose has operated in Biscayne National Park, and this is the first year that it's an entirely youth-driven project. The students that you see are from all over the country, and they've all come down here to South Florida to learn how to map shipwrecks and to be future stewards for archaeological resources on land and underwater. One of the things that the Diving with a Purpose program teaches is the mapping of shipwrecks underwater. And what this young man is doing right now is he's examining a fragment of the ship's keel. He'll take detailed measurements and translate all of that onto plastic mylar paper that we can write on underwater. Back in the classroom tomorrow, we'll take all the individual drawings that these students have produced and place them on an overall site plan and a map. And every tiny drawing will be used to create an overall plan that allows you to see the whole wreck at once and not just a little bit that you can see in front of you. One of the things that's great about the Youth Diving with a Purpose program is that not only does the National Park Service and Biscayne National Park get this great document that we can use in the operations of the park, but these kids get an awesome experience. They get a chance to see a little bit of what it's like to be an underwater archaeologist and what it's like to work underwater, not just to be a tourist, not just to visit a site and look at it, but actually to get down into the science, into the detailed documentation of how an archaeologist works underwater. One of the things we hope is not necessarily that all these young people are going to become archaeologists when they grow up, but all of them do come away with a new respect and understanding for historic sites and archaeological sites, both in the land and on the water. The shipwrecks in Biscayne National Park are under constant threat. There's a lot of people in the public who don't necessarily understand the value of a historic resource in place. And one of the goals of the National Park Service is to keep these sites intact for future generations. These young people will come away as stewards, will go back to their communities and explain to the world why it's important for these sites to stay where they're at and hopefully bring a little bit of better protection to them.
So one of the most progressive aspects of DWP's work is how they've managed to carve out space for themselves in the field of maritime archaeology. And maritime archaeology historically has been predominantly white and exclusionary to racial minorities and those of low economic and social status. In 1997, Dr. Maria Franklin wrote, "Why are there so few Black American archaeologists?" stating that one of the main reasons that African Americans did not participate in the field of archaeology was due to the prohibitive cost of training and education in the field. Dr. Franklin was speaking specifically to the lack of racial diversity in the field of terrestrial archaeology. However, maritime archaeology lags far behind terrestrial archaeology in regards to racial and class diversity among its practitioners. DWP has created pathways for stakeholder communities around the world to become trained cultural stewards of their submerged cultural resources, while also training formally educated terrestrial archaeologists of African descent to do maritime archaeology. DWP's training programs are an act of redress, really accounting for the disparities in access to formal and informal education in maritime archaeology and advocacy for people of color. And these training opportunities have provided avenues of possibility for underrepresented academic populations to gain entry into the field where traditional pathways were foreclosed to them. So yeah, thank you so much for allowing me to share more about DWP and this fantastic work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. It's amazing work, the archaeology, the restoration, the mentorship, the opportunities you're providing. I want to get in. I want to get out there and I want to mark some of those wrecks. And
please come out. We're always looking for volunteers.
So you're inviting me. I'm going to show up. Absolutely. So that brings me to a question. These opportunities are so unique. They're amazing mentoring opportunities. You talked about, intergenerations and how long it's been going for.
Yeah.
I'd love to know what kind of changes you see, especially in the youth, from when they come into the program and to, after they've been immersed in it for a while.
Yeah. The Youth Diving with a Purpose program, and I should say that the program itself has been featured widely on National Geographic. It's been featured in the New York Times as well. And the New York Times recently did a feature on one of the Youth Diving with a Purpose members, this amazing young Black woman who, through this program has been introduced to a myriad of different academic sort of pathways that she'd like to choose in terms of either marine biology, oceanic conservation. There's a way that being introduced to the mere idea that there are these possibilities of doing any kind of work underwater really just opens students up to really thinking creatively about what they can achieve. So we've seen a number of just like interest just spark in students, especially the high schoolers, as they're then thinking about, okay, well, what is it that I want to do when I go to college? And the possibilities are just like vast because of it.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Absolutely amazing. Stick around. We'll bring you back in for the panel. I am going to pop in our next panelist now. All right. Really excited to have Julia DeMarinis joining us today. She is an astrobiologist searching for life in the universe using powerful radio telescopes. She's also a science educator and communicator who uses the cosmic perspective to inspire the next generation of explorers. She has lived on Mars for 2 weeks and on the ocean floor for 3 months on various research vessels and has toured with the house band of the universe. Currently, she lives in Oakland, California, and if we're really lucky, her cat Bella may make a guest appearance. So Julia, it's so great to have you joining us live today. We're excited to get to know you a little bit better. And yeah, let's go for it. Oh, I think you might be on mute, Julia.
I was just trying to share my screen.
Perfect. We got it.
Am I coming through?
Yep, I got you nice and full screen.
Joe, thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. And Ayana, that was incredible, incredible projects you're a part of and just very inspirational. And I'm just honored to be a part of this panel and this whole Tektite 2020 event. I wore my best Steve Zissou Jacques Cousteau outfit for you all today in honor of some maritime fun. But to introduce myself again, my name is Julia DeMarinis, and I am an astrobiologist, as Joe said. And I work for the UC Berkeley SETI Research Center looking for life out there. And I'll go a little bit more into my research, but I wanted to share with you some of the fun places that I've had the privilege to live on. But before I do that, I wanted to make a quick land acknowledgement that I'm broadcasting from Oakland, California, which is the Chochenyo Ohlone people's land. And I have had the great fortune of living on Mars, I'm using air quotes, at the Mars Desert Research Station for 2 weeks, getting to live like an astronaut in the desert of Utah. It was a wild experience. And you might recognize Dr. Sarah Jane Pell here on the right, who is also a part of the Tektite 2020, one of the instigators of it. So I got to be on this expedition with her and our commander over here, Dr. Ryan Kobrick. And on this mission, we were testing out a number of scientific experiments. And the instrument I'm using here is a fluorescer. So it's looking for anything that fluoresces that could have chlorophyll in it. So it's kind of a prototype of a life detector. If we're ever going to go to Mars, we probably would want to bring instruments like this. So I was field testing that. And it was pretty wild to live like a Martian for 2 weeks, relying, solely on what you bring with you and what you can grow in the greenhouse. Also, living like an astronaut on the ocean are some of those research experiences I've been fortunate enough to participate in on ships. It's a very similar feeling. You're out there isolated. I lived on the ship called the research vessel called the Atlantis for 3 weeks that was studying hydrothermal sea vents at some of the deepest hydrothermal sea vents ever discovered on the bottom of the sea floor. And I spent 2 months living without land on the JOIDES Resolution, which is a drilling vessel that was drilling down below the seafloor, trying to understand the mysteries of continental crust formation. So why is Earth different than Venus and Mars? Earth has continental crust where these two planets don't, which is very interesting astrobiologically speaking. But so I've been on some amazing journeys, but I wanted to take you all on a journey today. This is a journey of the Voyager spacecraft that was launched in 1977 that took advantage of a favorable planetary alignment that could slingshot itself past using the gravity of Jupiter to get to the gas giants that we had not really photographed before. And this amazing spacecraft, there was 2 of them, the Voyager 1 and 2, got to the orbit of Neptune and turned its cameras back towards Earth and snapped this photo. And this is a really famous photo, for perhaps you've seen it. It might look a little grainy to our eyes today, but this is a photo of Earth. This is what we call the pale blue dot photo. It was inspired Carl Sagan's famous pale blue dot monologue, if you're familiar with that. But this is a glimpse to our planet from a distance. This is what an alien observer would look. This is how we would look like to an alien observer. And it was hugely influential, especially in the field of the up and coming field of astrobiology, which is still a relatively new field. But we hope to find other worlds out there and see other pale blue dots out there, not just beyond our solar system, and we call these exoplanets. And to date, we've discovered over 4,000 exoplanets. And the goal is to find life out there, right? What is the most fundamental human question is, are we alone? So we hope to find other pale blue dots out there. And to get even deeper and examine the atmospheres of these exoplanets to hopefully find signs of life. Our planet, we have oxygen and methane in our atmosphere that are considered what we call biosignatures. And so we need to stare at these exoplanets with very, very specialized instrumentation. So one of these future missions that will be able to allow us to see the faint reflected light from these exoplanets so we can get a glimpse of what is going on that planet is this technology called a starshade. And this is basically acts like Bose noise canceling headphones for starlight. It's super cool. I have a cool little gift for you. So this is still in development and right now. And it's going to unfurl like a sunflower. And it's just a super cool mix of origami and art and science all packed into one mission, hopefully if it gets funded and launched, called HabX. And as I mentioned, this starshade will allow this faint light from these exoplanets to enter our telescopes so we can start to dive in and understand if these worlds have life on them. And how cool is that? So we want to find these pale blue dots, and here are just some more images of our planet from a distance, because we have powerful spacecraft that are able to go far, far away and turn its cameras back. So here's the pale blue dot photo one more time for you. This one on the right here is what we look like from Mercury on the Messenger spacecraft. And another one of my favorite selfies is the pale blue dot photo from the Cassini mission orbiting around Saturn. So that little dot there, that's us, that's here. And so we know our planet is alive. We have evidence of, well, we have oxygen in our atmosphere. These are biosignatures. And there's a lot of information you can gain by looking at our planet. But we also do something else. our planet is communicating. We are sending out powerful radio signals that not just communicate that our planet is alive, but is communicating that our planet has technology. And so that's what we do for my job, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So we're announcing our presence to the cosmos, and radio waves can travel through interstellar dust, which is actually makes us a little more visible than just our biosignature. So we have what we call a techno signature. And we've been communicating our techno signature for about the last 100 years. But are there others out there? Is there anyone phoning home? Is there anyone watching MTV Yo Raps that we want to pick up their signal? And so you might have heard this story through the movie Contact, this project called SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Really, we should call it the Search for Extraterrestrial Technology. And one of the panelists earlier was Dr. Jill Tarter, who this character, Jodie Foster, plays, was based off of Jill Tarter. So we are searching today. We are searching for signs of extraterrestrial technology through a project called Breakthrough Listen, which is housed at the University of California at Berkeley, at the Berkeley SETI Research Center. And that's what I do. I help out with some of these observations. So we know this type of signals that we are capable of emitting. We transmit powerful radio waves with these television and radio towers. This one is Sutro Tower in San Francisco. We also are pinging nearby asteroids just to make sure we don't end up like the dinosaurs. And turns out those pings are really, really powerful and can be detected across the galaxy. And we also use these green lasers to help us with what we call adaptive optics, which give us a better view of the sky when we're observing with these powerful optical telescopes. So we know we have these technologies, so perhaps we should be searching for these from elsewhere. And so the Breakthrough Listens utilizes a number of telescopes. Here are 3 of them. We use the Automated Planet Finder near San Jose and Lick Observatory, looking for powerful laser pulses. We use the Green Bank Telescope in West Virginia and the Parkes Telescope in Australia, and we lease time on them. And we have a lot of collaborations with a bunch of other telescopes around the world. Some of them are coming online right now. So we're listening for signs of technology out there. But my research, I just wanted to talk briefly about what I do. I help with some of the observations, the SETI observations. But my question is, well, what do we not look like, but what do we sound like to an alien observer? In other words, what is our techno signature? And we can start to answer this question by using the moon. The moon is a natural reflector of radio light, and our signals bounce off the moon, and we can get a reflection of ourselves from the moon, which is kind of cool and romantic in a way. I just wanted to show you briefly how that works before getting into some other fun projects. So we have radio towers all over the world that are transmitting mostly horizontally, because that's where people are, unless you're communicating to a satellite or an astronaut. And those waves will leave the planet and be reflected off of the moon, some of them, and hopefully we can capture them in our telescopes. We have to be careful not to weed out the local radio interference on nearby towers. So that's just something to consider. So we want to know, what are we alone out there? And I'm very, very interested and passionate in that question of searching. But I'm also really passionate about teaching. I was inspired at a early age by the movie Contact, because there was a woman that looked like me doing science, and that was important. So before I got in to SETI, I was working at the Chabot Space and Science Center in Oakland, California as an informal educator. And I was new to education. I had been in the science field for a long time, and most of my my outreach was just, I was learning from experience. So I was looking for some resources, for some online trainings, anything that could to help me better serve the students that I was working with. And I came across a National Geographic fellowship called the Grosvenor Teacher Fellowship. I applied, and I was fortunate enough to be one of 40 teachers who got to go through this fellowship. So I think searching for life in the universe is an amazing hook to get kids inspired, kids and adults, anyone really. So I wanted to use the cosmic perspective to inspire. So with the Grosvenor Teacher Fellowship, I was fortunate enough to go on one of these National Geographic expeditions to the Galapagos, where we got to see chonky little albatross babies, and it was really super cute. And I was also paired with another Nat Geo educator, Logan McWilliams, who we didn't know each other at the time, but we ended up living around the block from each other, which was so cool. So we got to share this experience together, and she's an Oakland teacher. So I could sit here all day and show you pretty pictures of life in the Galapagos. But what I really want to share with you was what I did with that expedition. So while Logan and I were on this expedition, we got to visit all of these islands. And on these islands, each island has its own unique properties. Some are dry, some are have more vegetation, some are more rocky, have lagoons, etc. And each of these islands is almost like its own little world. And the life on these islands have adapted and evolved to the specific conditions of each island. And Logan and I were talking, and we were part of our expedition purpose was to come up with a lesson plan. And I was really wanting to tie this to astrobiology, and it struck me, that, you know, these islands are like their own little worlds. That if we do find these exoplanets and there is life on them, the life would have had to adapted to the world that it was on, obviously, right? But it was so cool to see that in such close proximity. But I thought, well, let's use that in a lesson plan. So we came up with a lesson plan where we get students to create their own exoplanet. It could be whatever they wanted, their wildest imagination. We had some really cool planet ideas. We had like a lava planet. We had a cotton candy planet. This one was a Gucci planet. And their mission was to describe the planet, and then they have to come up with the life that would be able to live on that world. So say it's a desert planet. Is your planet full of scorpions? Is it a water world? Is it full of everything with webbed feet? If it's a cotton candy world, obviously it must be inhabited by unicorns. So things like that really spark the imagination and bring the experience from the Galapagos to astrobiology and also involve art. And we did this with another National Geographic educator, Becky Schnexer from Virginia. And the results were really fun. And we got to go to Logan's classroom to do the activity. And it was just really great to see students getting into the creativity of astrobiology through art. And I wanted to introduce another project that I am a part of that involves some citizen science, and that is called the Ad Astra Academy. And our tagline is inspiring underserved students to discover opportunities through science and exploration. And we go to places around the world and domestically to do these week-long hands-on STEM workshops. And the areas that we go into, we only go where we are invited. So there's some communities that want to boost their school or bring in something different. They'll reach out to us, and we'll apply for grants to bring in some some cool exploration equipment and some lesson plans, and we'll work with the local community to do these hands-on lessons. So this one was from Bangladesh. All of our STEM workshops involve accessible hands-on activities and some citizen science. So we build these like Secchi disc. We always go on a field trip. We bring some simple tools like binoculars and microscopes. And it is amazing to see what just the simplest tools can do to spark somebody's curiosity. And I've never seen so many people fight over binoculars before. Usually I get made fun of for busting mine out, but man, it's just, it was really, really inspirational to see these students latch on to this experience. So just wanted to mention some of the places that the Ad Astra Academy has partnerships in, and one of them, the first has been Rio de Janeiro. We've done a pilot program in Oakland in Bangladesh at this all-girls school, and recently Nigeria, and I'll show a quick video on that in a second. And we are looking to boost up our domestic STEM workshops in both Boston and Oakland. And I'm going to switch screens here, so just bear with me for a second. And just wanted to show you a little trailer of our experience in Nigeria.
Science is everything. When you talk about solving problems, you need to develop a scientific mindset.
Our overall goal is to inspire kids who might not otherwise have the chance to pursue science, and to do it at the front lines of exploration.
All students are natural explorers and naturally curious. And if we can bring anything to the table to kind of further that curiosity, then I feel like we've done our job.
My mind is literally blown right now. Science is the best.
This is kind of the best adventure I've ever had.
And that video was courtesy of Philip Knowlton of Opposite Films. Okay. Okay, so I just wanted to talk briefly. I don't know how I'm doing on time, but hopefully I'm not over my budget. But why do I do it? Why do I take my, precious vacation time to do STEM workshops? I just wanted to share that this is a snippet of what my office looks like. As you can see, there's not many women involved in SETI. It's changing, but slowly. And I know the struggles I had getting into this field and staying in this field. I've had a very up and down career. And it hasn't been easy. And as you can see, there's also a lack of diversity in the sciences. So that's why I do it, because I want to have different voices at the table if they want to be there. And I want to work with her and with them if that's where they want to be, or at least do my part in inspiring the next generation to pursue their dreams. So another project that I do, I don't just communicate to students. I sometimes communicate to adults and sometimes slightly inebriated adults with a project called Space in Your Face, which blends comedy, science, and humor into one kind of variety show. I've been doing this since 2012, started in Denver, Colorado, and now I do it in Oakland and the Bay Area, and it's sponsored by Blue Marble Space. And the reason why I wanted to do that is because astrobiology is such a fascinating subject, and I wanted to share my the feelings that I have, the passion I have with anyone, especially those who maybe didn't feel that science was inclusive for them growing up, and they missed being able to study that in college, or even getting to go to college, or what have you. it's never too late to get involved in space science and astrobiology, or at least be inspired by it. So I involve the Space in Your Face involves local community members. Have some friends that that have amazing dance moves, better than I could do, and we make cover songs, and they are tasked with helping out with this. So they get to make up their own cover songs. We have had people that wanted to share their music. They make cool space music that they wanted to share with this event. And we have just a wild range of skits, and there's a lot of drag for some reason. But it blends bringing scientists down to an accessible level. So the two women on my side, I don't know if you recognize, that was me there. Jada over here works at NASA Goddard, and Kelsey works at the Southwest Research Institute. So these are cutting edge researchers that are coming to share their science at a bar with some local musicians, all coalescing into one fun event. Just wanted to show you some fun, flashy slides of that really fast. I do this now in Oakland, where I'm new to the community, and I mainly go to open mic nights and stalk people and see if they want to collaborate on some space goodness. So just some local artists that I've worked with. And I got to bring back Logan, who's not only an amazing educator, but an amazing singer, and even involves some different mediums such as burlesque to communicate exoplanetary orbits and detection methods. So to close, I just feel it's like a duty to use my privilege and platform to inspire the next generation and to communicate the cosmic perspective. Because it'd be great to see more people in the office that have a wider range of diversity, especially in the sciences. And I just wanted to end with a quote, one of my favorite quotes from Dr. Jill Tarter, that we, all of us, are what happens when a primordial mixture of hydrogen and helium evolves for so long that it begins to ask where it came from. I wanted to say thank you so much to Tektite 2020 for having me. Let's collaborate. If any of this sounds something that you would like to be a part of, I'm always looking for community members, scientists, educators, musicians. Hit me up. Thank you so much.
All right, Julia, thank you so much. That was an amazing presentation. I love the science communication work you're doing, the way you're reaching the younger generation as well. I visited the Galapagos with Nat Geo in 2016, and I had that same observation. Every island was almost like a world onto its own, but I love how you gave it that astrobiology, that perspective of looking out at the planets. Very, very cool activity.
Thank you so much for having me, Joe.
All right, well, I am going to pop you out. Stay close. We're gonna have a few questions coming up, but I am now gonna bring in our next panelist. There we go. All right. Dr. Shawna Pandya is joining us. She is a physician, aquanaut, scientist, astronaut candidate with Project Possum, public speaker, martial artist, advanced diver, skydiver, pilot in training, VP Immersive Medicine with Luxonic Technologies, and a fellow of the Explorers Club. Her exploration and analog experience has taken her to the Mars Desert Research Station as commander and as the crew medical officer. In 2019, she earned her Aquanaut designation with a 5-day underwater Neptune nautical experiments in physiology, technology, underwater, and exploration at Jules Undersea Lodge, as well as her dive medical technician designation at the Aquarius Reef Base with the World Extreme Medicine Organization. Shawna, it's so awesome to have you joining us live today, a fellow Canadian coming to each other from across the country. We're really excited to dive in and learn a little bit more about the work you do.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Joe. And I have to say, I really enjoy the liberal use of the word dive in throughout this session. It's very appropriate. So what I hope to do, we've heard some awesome presentations from Dr. Ayana and Dr. Julia. We talked about the importance of sea exploration. We talked about the importance of of space exploration. And hopefully I'll be the bridge that talks about the importance of both, how they tie in together, as well as the importance of exploration and citizen science. as a whole in the context of this global citizenry panel. So without further ado, let me introduce myself. So my name is Dr. Shawna Pandya, as you heard. I'm a physician, scientist, astronaut candidate with Project POSSUM and the International Institute of Astronautical Sciences. I'm an aquanaut, as well as the VP of Immersive Medicine at Luxonic Technologies, director of the IIAS POSSUM Space Medicine Group, the COVID Health Task Force, as well as the Operational Space Medicine class, and a whole lot more. But rather than just spending one slide on it, maybe I'll spend the presentation talking about more of what I do in depth. So, what is a citizen scientist anyways? Well, simply put, it's any individual who contributes their time, effort, resources towards investigation, science research, scientific research in collaboration with professional scientists or on their own. And so the other question I want to ask is the three questions I want you to keep in mind in the context of this presentation, specifically in the context of citizen science, is what does it mean to explore? Why does it matter? And how do we enable exploration? Let's start with a definition. Simply put, returning to the dictionary definition, the Latin roots of explorare, exploration means to investigate and to search out. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking about my experiences in three different locales, specifically within the citizen scientist astronautics sphere, then within the analog environment and extreme environment sphere, which Julia talked about a little bit with the Mars Desert Research Station, and finally talking about my experience in the aquanautics world. And I'll talk a little bit about the lessons learned, as well as the broader themes of why does it matter and how do we empower and enable explorers and citizen scientists going forward. So I've been with Project POSSUM as a scientist astronaut candidate since 2015. As you may have gleaned, in the space world, we love our acronyms, and POSSUM is no different. POSSUM stands for Polar Suborbital Science of the Upper Mesosphere. And the initial mandate of this program was to further our knowledge of aeronomy, specifically upper mesospheric science. And this started out with a mandate to further understand noctilucent clouds, which are a relatively new type of cloud, new on the aeronomical record and meteorological record since the late 1800s, and are thought to be a marker of climate change, especially given that they tend to be more prevalent and appear at lower latitudes than their typical habitat around the polar regions since that time. And so, as a scientist astronaut candidate, your introduction to the program is to go through the ground school, as well as which entails learning about the basics of aeronomy, particularly noctilucent cloud science, their formation, and then undergo the simulation of what it would be like to go up as a citizen scientist in a suborbital vehicle on a scientific mission to get more data about noctilucent clouds, their composition, high resolution video and imaging. And you learn about this through online webinars, and then finalize your ground school candidacy by attending the 4 to 5 day ground school and experiencing aerobatic flight, which you can see examples of in the top right and left panels here. You undergo the mission profile by flying the simulation. So you can see myself and fellow Canadian Dr. Michael Gallagher in that middle top panel. And then later on, you experience that in a suborbital flight simulator in an IVA or intravehicular activity suit. And basically, this program is open to anyone with a STEM degree, ideally a scuba diving license, and then ideally a pilot's license, which is a nice to have but not need to have. And if you don't meet the STEM undergraduate degree requirement, you can apply to the POSSUM Academy sphere. So that's for anyone who may not yet have their bachelor's degree, or for example, who may have a degree or a Bachelor of Arts. So the program was met with tremendous success, and it turned out there were other avenues for exploration within bioastronautics that citizen scientists could contribute to. So since 2015, I have taken part in annual parabolic flight campaigns. So for those of you who aren't familiar, parabolic flight is our way of simulating microgravity on Earth without ever having to go to space. So if you can imagine, you're in a standard aircraft, you're flying, we fly at 17,000 feet, and parabola means simply you're flying in an upside down U shape, and simulating microgravity by falling at the same rate as the aircraft, just like you kind of feel that brief second of weightlessness when an elevator starts to descend, only you're doing this for 20 to 30 second periods at a time. And so through these campaigns, we have both increased the technology readiness level of this commercial intravehicular activity suit. I was part of the first crew to test a commercial IVA suit in microgravity in 2015. Every year we've increased the level of what we're testing. So you can see on the far right there, I believe this is 2018 was our first year that we actually managed to progress to pressurized visor down testing. And we've further enabled citizen scientists by encouraging and enabling course participants to propose their own payloads that would benefit from the microgravity environment, and then go through the approval process, that is developing a test equipment development package, as well as ethics approval where human subjects are involved. So this is an example. This is kind of our hero shot from our 2016 campaign at the National Research Council in Ottawa. And we've done other cool things as well within the astronautic citizen science sphere. So in 2017, I partook in a high altitude noctilucent cloud campaign in high level Alberta. So this is on the right panel, you can see we flew in an unpressurized aircraft at 19,000 feet. We were testing a brand new tomography instrument to try to get more three-dimensional information of the composition of these noctilucent clouds. It was incredible. So we're in northern Alberta. So Alberta, Canada is where I reside. So it was just fortuitous that this is where we flew out of. We're far enough north that at this time of the year, it was late June, early July. You are experiencing essentially 21 hours of daylight and perpetual twilight when the sun does go down between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. And using, that time of year as well as the patterns of noctilucent clouds to visualize these clouds, as well as using tomography instruments on the ground, 200 kilometers apart, to further triangulate and delineate the structures of these clouds. I have this habit of saying after every single one of my missions, that was my favorite campaign ever. So if you catch me saying that was my favorite mission, it's probably true of all my missions. So on the left here, I was just about to say this is one of my favorite missions, but really they all were. This was where we progressed to working with Final Frontier Design, who developed that IVA spacesuit, who went and developed an EVA, or extravehicular activity spacesuit, which is the kind of spacesuit you see on spacewalks when they're doing work out of the international, outside the International Space Station, or the type the Apollo astronauts wore during their moon missions. And so we partnered with several institutions, including the Canadian Space Agency, and this was where we worked in their high bay in October of last year to test out the movement of the EVA spacesuit, as well as one of our partners who developed a gravity offset system so they can offload your weight to simulate either lunar gravity at 1/6 of Earth's gravity, Martian gravity at 1/3 of Earth's gravity, or zero gravity or microgravity like you would experience outside the ISS. So you can see here in this panel, I'm simulating doing some drilling work on an ISS panel. We've also tested the IVA spacesuit in off-nominal spacecraft crash landing scenarios to see how the suit would react in a simulated capsule landing in water if you had to egress from the spacesuit, from the spacecraft, and make your way to an emergency craft. And coming back to my own roots as a physician, I've managed to take my expertise and create a course called Operational Space Medicine, where essentially you become a medical space MacGyver and learned the principles of austere environment, extreme environment, medical assessment, triage, and treatment. And you can see in these photos, the participants, they came from all backgrounds. These were medical lay folk, and they came from military backgrounds, piloting backgrounds, computer science backgrounds, aeronomy backgrounds, non-medical, non-healthcare. And by the end of our course, which is online webinars as well as a 5-day in-person component, they aced, all the simulations we threw at them, whether it was simple trauma, polytrauma, mass casualty, night scenario. They did amazingly, and they really got into it, and the feedback was great. So that's my work in the citizen science sphere. So I'm just going to switch tracks now and talk about my experiences, as Dr. Julia had alluded to, in the analog environment. So you kind of might have an idea of what an analog environment is. And we use the term analog to refer to the fact that these environments are analogous to the space flight environment. So even parabolic flight is analogous to the space flight environment in the respect that it replicates the zero-G aspect. So places like the Mars Desert Research Station, you're simulating real life on fake Mars, and you're replicating the ice or isolated and confined extreme environment component of the habit of life on Mars. And so I've done 2 rotations, as you heard in my introduction. In 2018, I was the crew medical officer. And in 2020, earlier at the beginning of this year, pre-pandemic, I led my first crew as commander. And you bring the science that you want to do. It's really, this is citizen science at its finest. Whatever you want to achieve in exploration, geology, physiology, you propose that science and you bring it with you. And you learn a lot about team dynamics and crew behavioral health, and really whatever it is you set out to explore, which I'll talk about in these slides. And finally, I want to just talk about my experience in the aquanautics world. So ocean exploration, I don't think I have to convince you why it's important, but some of my favorite statistics about ocean exploration is that we have put more people on the moon. We've had 12 men walk on the moon than we have had people explore the Marianas Trench, the deepest part of our ocean. So I think the figure is now 6. We've since had 2 women go down to the bottom of the Marianas Trench, but 95% of our oceans remain unmapped and unexplored. And so coming back to where it fits in within analog and ice science and exploration is underwater analog habitats. So what you can see in these photos here, I took part in the World Extreme Medicine Dive Medical Technician course, and I obtained my DMT designation at the Aquarius Reef Base last year. This is also where NASA NEMO, or the NASA Extreme Environment Mission Operations, runs its missions, and they send astronaut crews down there for 8 to 18 days at a time to explore crew dynamics, to explore living in an isolated and confined extreme environment, to explore how physiology changes in such a saturation, remote environment. And I'm not going to talk too much about this because I want to entice you to come to the Age of Aquarius panel in a couple of hours, where I'll talk more about the medical implications of underwater habitats. But this was the first of my forays into aquanautics. I spent 18 hours underwater at Aquarius Reef Base, not at saturation during this sojourn, because it actually takes 16 hours to decompress after you've spent 24 hours in saturation at Aquarius. So my aquanautics designation was obtained with my Neptune mission at the end of 2019. This was pure citizen science, together with colleagues from previous citizen scientist astronautics and MDRS missions. We conceived of the Neptune mission, which we love our analog, stands for Nautical Experiments in Physiology, Technology, and Underwater Exploration. We worked to conceive of the science in physiology, cognition, psychology. We went through the ethics review, we performed science, and we're currently writing those experiments, these results up. We stayed at the Jules Undersea Lodge at 20 feet. We for 5 days in October of 2019. We performed technology demonstrations as well with our partners, including partnering with a physician in Canada to do a VR medical radiology demo. And the lessons learned from each of these three environments, astronautics, analog environments, aquanautics, there's just so many to share. I've alluded to some of them. But just to briefly talk about the crew dynamics aspect, you learn so much about how you interact with your crew, about staying mission focused, about the need to be flexible, to have enough scheduled activities to mitigate boredom, to plan for dealing with downtime, as well as the need to be flexible when the crew's morale may be swinging one way versus another, and also the importance of having a plan, a backup plan, and a backup plan. I often talk about resilience and coping and the lessons learned from extreme and ice environments. These really all came into play in each of these, particularly during the Mars Desert Research Station and Jules Neptune missions. So in the interest of time, I want to kind of come back to where these have led and where the bridge from citizen science to everyday professional life leads. And so in my other forays, for those of you who are space aficionados, you may have noticed that commercial human spaceflight is quickly becoming one of the dominant forces in human spaceflight. My interest in what started out as a citizen scientist astronautics has led to publications in medical guidelines for commercial spaceflight. I alluded to doing an underwater tech demo with a VR radiological suite during the Neptune mission that has since translated into my joining the company, Lexonic Technologies, to develop VR medical training modules for exploration class missions. And also all of these experiences in essentially designing medical capabilities for remote environments has translated into joining Orbital Assembly as a medical advisor. So coming back to that initial question, what is a citizen scientist? A citizen scientist is a scientist. And so to end on the broader themes that we started out talking about today in the context of citizen scientists, what does it mean to explore? We talked about that. So I want to address now why it matters and how we enable exploration going forward. And so when I think about exploration and why it matters, I think that exploration is akin to empowerment. And to give you an analogy, why do we climb those steep, slippery slopes? Why did we go that far and put in all that effort with our heavy life support systems on our backs when we were at the Mars Desert Research Station? Well, it was to figure out what came next. If we didn't climb those slippery slopes, if we didn't put in that effort, we wouldn't uncover the paths that lead to be explored next. And we wouldn't have seen what access we could gain to further paths of exploration. And giving that access, gaining that knowledge is a form of empowerment. And so I think we have an imperative to empower anyone who's interested to explore, because when we empower people to explore, we unlock their potential. Dr. Julia, during her talk, had talked about the importance of empowering students and those with an interest in this space. This picture is particularly meaningful to me because these are members of the Possum 13. So this is a group named in homage to the Mercury 13. 13 women who were tested by NASA flight surgeon William Lovelace to prove that women could test as well as, if not better, than the Mercury 7 astronauts. And our mission is to serve as ambassadors for citizen science and to encourage opportunities and careers in space and space exploration for underrepresented groups, particularly young women. And you can see we're posing here at Cinder Lake, where Apollo astronauts did their early training in Arizona. So the final question I want to end with today is, how do we enable exploration going forward? Well, first of all, I hope to have convinced you that beyond enabling empowerment and curiosity, exploration is a survival tool. Asking questions is a survival tool. We need to look no further than the race to develop vaccines in the era of COVID-19 in the present era. So how do we enable this? I think it starts with a simple question. Every single person tuning in today, every single person on the street, every single student out there can ask this simple question. If you want to investigate, if you want to search out, you ask the simple question starting with 2 words. What if? So I'm going to leave it on that note. I know we have so much to talk about with the time remaining to us today. So thank you so much for your attention.
All right. Awesome, Shawna. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing, those perspectives, the adventures you've been on, and what you've learned from exploration. I think those points around being flexible, teamwork, being able to laugh, I think those are key things that every explorer, every scientist needs to be able to have, because I'm sure you know that things don't always go as planned.
Sorry, can you say that again?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, Shawna. I was just saying, I really appreciate what you shared today, especially those tips, of what you've learned from exploration with being flexible, backup plans, being able to laugh, working as a team. I think those are all things scientists and explorers need to have in spades, because nothing ever goes as planned, it seems sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when we turn to science fiction, I think Mark Watney is my favorite example of embodying those characteristics, because he was resourceful, resilient, and he absolutely had a sense of humor.
Absolutely. All right, let's reunite the panel. Let's bring everybody on screen together. Looking good. Okay, so let's dive right into some questions. And the first one I want to start with is, we're talking about being global citizens. As you're growing up, it's a very local community that you are exposed to, and then that grows over time. Oftentimes, it's being inspired by someone or something. And so, for me growing up, it was David Attenborough and Jacques Cousteau. Watching the work that they were doing around the world, it was so important to me. I would love to hear from each of you if you had kind of that aha moment, if there was an educator or someone you met, or a book or a movie, something that kind of triggered it for you. Why don't we start with Julia? Let's mix it up a little.
Thank you for the question. And yeah, I alluded to it. And I just want to say, first of all, the Shawna and Ayana, your presentations were just fantastic. And I didn't want to move forward without acknowledging how wonderful that and inspiring they were. But I mentioned in my presentation that I saw the movie Contact when I was 13. And that blew my mind, because it was somebody that looked like me doing really amazing search for life out there. And that was it for me. And I was privileged enough that my family fostered that inspiration in me into college. And I pursued astronomy in college because of that, and had some teachers and mentors along the way that kept inspiring me and mentoring me. But that was the pivotal moment, was that movie.
Yeah. Awesome. Ayana?
Yeah, thank you again for that question. I'm a trained terrestrial archaeologist and have recently gotten into doing maritime heritage advocacy work. And I think when I think about what got me into archaeology, especially when the representation of archaeology does not at all look like me, really came from my mother. And I spent a little bit of time in my childhood growing up in Tacoma Park, Maryland. And my mom, being a single mother who worked in nonprofit, I don't know anyone who works in nonprofit knows money flows up and down, but she was able to always take me to the National Mall and take me to all of the Smithsonian museums. And there was something about being able to be in those spaces free and just explore and be able to see these artifacts and see the narratives designed around them. I wanted to figure out, well, what would it look like to be a part of that process? And it really opened me up to even thinking about archaeology in that way when I was an exploratory major at the University of Florida as an undergrad. So I think, being able to have these spaces of exposure really creates the difference. And I think it's about trying to figure out that gap between exposing students and then providing them the educational access to really work towards those goals becomes the next real step. So, yeah.
All right, Shawna, did you have a moment, an aha moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in the 90s, and that was shortly, in 1992, we had our second ever Canadian Space Agency astronaut selection. And with that came Dr. Roberta Bondar, the first female Canadian in space. And, I was just so inspired by everything she did, and I looked at her career trajectory, and this is kind of coming back to the question of representation and why it matters, because I looked at her and said, okay, she's Canadian, I'm Canadian, okay, check. She's a girl guide, I'm a girl guide. She's female, I'm female, so all I need to do is go be a neuroscientist, physician, astronaut, and I've made it, right? And so that's exactly what inspired me to go do my undergraduate degree in neuroscience. It's what inspired me to go be a physician. And so, that's the beginning of why representation matters. And it really hit home for me when I was giving a talk to STEM undergrads, and this young Southeast Asian female came up to me at the end of the talk, and she said, seeing you up there makes me realize that someone like me can do that too. And that was just such a powerful moment. And so it was the beginning of, there's someone who looks a lot like me, but not exactly like me. And that's why Dr. Ayana's work, for example, with the Black Divers Association is so important. And it's just the tip of the iceberg. But that was my aha moment.
All right, excellent. I love that so many can remember, those moments and how they really can have an impact charting people's future courses. So knowing that we're here and we're talking about Tektite 2020 and 50 years since the Tektite 2 Mission 6 inspired so many people around the world, I'm wondering what each of you thinks about the most important lesson learned in the last 50 years of sea and space exploration. So I'm wondering if there's something that stands out to you, a discovery, a new technology in either of those spheres that you think was pretty impactful. Why don't we go put someone on the spot? Ayana, what do you think?
I think what I've learned, and like the excitement of it, is just knowing that there's so much more to explore. And that's what I've gotten out of presentations yesterday and today as well. It's just like, what we know is so vast. And then the thought that, wow, like, what else is there out? Like, I think that's really just like the yumminess of it for me, is that we can look back and see, wow, this is so much amazing work. And the future, like the possibilities of the future. My mouth is always in awe. Like even listening to Julia and Shawna, I'm just like, wow, like mouth in awe. I can't wait for the future. I get excited about it.
Absolutely. Julia?
Exactly what she said, what Dr. Ayana said. Curiosity and that thirst, that fervor for exploration and discovery, I think is huge to continue the field of exploration. But one thing I wanted to add and piggyback off of was over the last, 50 years of sea and space exploration, I don't know the exact minutia of every detail of all of these previous expeditions, but I can speak from the experiences I had. And I know something that I thought was perhaps the most, lesson learned was the human aspect, the people that you're with, your crewmates. You are in it to win it. You're a team, and there's a lot of interpersonal skills. You're not only just out there being an explorer, a scientist, a doctor. You are a human, and you have to heal wounds not only physically but mentally in your soul sometimes when you encounter problems. So I think like the interpersonal skills, I think, are coming out as of huge importance into exploration. And one thing to tie the bow on that thought is play and fun. Like that's such an important part of it. And it's not all robotic science. It's like playfulness too. You have to have a good time and laugh. And I think, I forget who mentioned it. Probably you both mentioned it, but that I think is super important.
Shawna?
I'm grinning because I was flashing back to the Neptune mission where our executive officer had planned underwater Olympics with different events every single night, including feats of athleticism, feats of treachery, feats of intellect. So it's so important, that human element. And so I would just extrapolate again on what both doctors Ayana and Julia said, is that, first of all, encouraging the continual asking of questions, asking those what if questions, because what we're learning about discovery is that there's no end in sight. It's like the Zeno's paradox, where you discover one path and it branches off into two more paths, which in turn branch into two more paths. And then the other aspect of it is, the human dynamics of it. We know that, behavioral health, preventative health, looking for team players, looking for those explorers, those astronauts who have the right stuff, is so important. But that also depends, that will change with the mission profile. So what we know about the correct mission for Antarctica, for the International Space Station, we may have to recalibrate that when we talk about a 3-year mission profile to Mars, for example. So, it's so exciting to think about, but I would say those are my top 2.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to ask you a question. I want, Shawna and Julia have both taken part in the Mars analog. And I'm wondering if that's something that would be of interest to you, that kind of an experiment and trying something like that, a little bit different than diving under the water.
Absolutely. I think for me, especially being trained as a terrestrial archaeologist, my mind was blown when I was introduced to underwater archaeology. And there's a way that while I knew that the field existed, I've read the research, I have colleagues that do this work, there was something that just felt inaccessible about it to me. So then when I saw Diving with a Purpose as an organization, and I was like, I would love to be able to do this work. And then my first dive, as I'm sure everyone can attest to, like, it's mind-blowing. It's absolutely mind-blowing. And it not only shifts what you know about underwater, it also shifts the way that you're thinking about the world in general. So then the research questions that you have for your research prior to are completely different. So yeah, these experiences, earth-shattering and be so amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a little sneaker coming to keep me company here. Hi, Nora. Oh, I love it. Paw Patrol. You guys know about Paw Patrol? It's big. No, Paw Patrol is big. And then, so Julia, we know Shawna and Ayana spend time underwater. Are you a diver?
I have a certification. I haven't used it in a long time, but you all are inspiring me to get back under the water to pay homage to my last name.
All right. Well, I wish we could just keep this going forever, because talking to the three of you has been such an amazing experience. I love all the work that you're doing and the way that you weave in the general public, the way you weave in students, the next generation. It's so very important. So thank you so much to everybody who joined us online today, but a huge thanks to all three of you. Everything you do is so inspiring for the next generation of global citizens. So 50 years ago, the all-female crew of Tektite 2 Mission 6 inspired the world. They showed what was possible and paved the way for the future, exploration that we're having right now. So the last couple of days have shown us that their accomplishments and their legacy is still alive and well today, not only through the three of you, but through countless others who continue pushing the limits of exploration, both in our ocean and in space. And of course, the continuing work of the amazing Tektite 2 crew who are still going strong. So thank you, Shawna. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Ayana. I can't wait to dive into more of your work, find ways to collaborate. It was such a pleasure to host you today on day 2.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And keep looking up and down.
All right. So as I release our panelists, I am going to bring Sarah back in. Sarah's going to take over from me. Sarah, so great to see you. We've got Sue hanging out backstage. I will throw things your way.
Thank you so much. And as Julia said, let's keep going, deeper and further beyond. It is with great pleasure that I introduce our next speaker, who is doing exactly that. She's taking exploration to a whole new level. Hi, Sue.
Hi, wonderful to be here.
Thank you, Sue. Sue is joining us live on location from the UK. She is a performance artist, an installation and multimedia artist, and she works in extraordinary ways to reconfigure preconceptions around ability and disability. She works in empowering both herself and creating empowering narratives through exploration in both the sea and space. It's a pleasure to be joined by you, Sue. Sue, before we kick off, we're going to take a quick look at some of your work to inspire us all. Sorry about that, Sue. We have some communications difficulties. We are just going to, Joe is going to show us a pre-recorded video. So we have conducted an interview prior to this, and we're going to hear that now. I've shared my screen. Joe, if we could play that movie, please. Hi, Joe. We seem to be having, you don't have that. I have that, and I've put it up as the screen share, Joe. I would like to, I've pressed, I'm screen sharing now.
Do you know, it started as an idea about clay.
I'm sorry about this, Sue. We've had an amazing discussion, and we went through all of this preparation in order to be able to overcome challenges, and it's so straightforward.
Yes.
A wheelchair.
I can see your video here. Here we go.
In completely unexpected context, so that people might, it might free people from their preconceptions, and they might see it in a different way. But actually, it's become this extraordinary, the thing I haven't anticipated is it's the most extraordinary sense of freedom. And effectively, it's the reverse of flying. So I have a hydroplane attached to the foot plates, and by simply swapping the orientation of the foot plates, the hinges behind my heel, and I have enough foot movement to steer with the hydroplanes, and then I have two motors attached under the seat of the wheelchair, and a tail fin to prevent it rotating, or to enable me to control the rotation around the centre of gravity. So it was a tremendous journey to understand how the physical dynamics worked. And once I had got to the point of being able to loop the loop with ease, when I had two dive propulsion vehicles, they're called Pegasus thrusters, attached underneath. The feeling of the flow of the water across my body is giving me much more sensation than I normally have in life. So it's a process of being completely supported and having the ability, when the wheelchair loops the
Is that me losing sound?
Hey, Sarah, just want to pop in for a sec. The sound seems to have dropped on your end.
freedom. But then it was
Can you hear that, Sue?
it was quite a while before I was able to get my own second-hand wheelchair to use myself, and quite a while longer before I could be out in the world. But it was like hitting a brick wall, finding the way in which people's reaction changed to me. I mean, partly we're below people's levels of awareness, but it's more than that. People, it's something about being met with, and I think things have changed enormously since I started this journey in the mid-90s.
Sarah, just popping in again. The sound has dropped on us. I just sent you a message via WhatsApp.
Well, that was a debacle. I'm so sorry, Sue. If you could unmute as well, and we can just try live.
Haven't. Oh, lovely. Brilliant.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
We had all sorts of technical difficulties, and just as you've had technical difficulties, we've gone to be able to present with Wi-Fi in the middle of COVID-19 lockdown restrictions. But we're delighted to have an insight into your world and into your work.
Thank you. It's just amazing to be asked to be part of a celebrating Tektite, the Tektite 2 Mission 6 event. It's extraordinary.
Well, you're also doing extraordinary work. We've had a taste of it. We've had a sense of it. We've seen what you have been exploring underwater. We've had a sense that you're preparing for flight. But tell us a little bit about what it means for you and what the broader impact has been in the community.
So for me, it started with when I first started using a wheelchair. Became subsumed by the stereotypes. This was back in the 1990s, so I think there's been a substantial change now, and apologies if this has already come across, but I didn't hear it. So from the first moment I used a wheelchair, it was my freedom. But then as I started building out into life, I started using an arts practice to explore my new embodiment in the world. And at some point you start exploring some aspect of your own identity, I think, as an art student. And I was retraining. I had a previous career in mental health that I was retired from. And so the two overlapped, I think. There's always been an interest in a socially engaged, an artistic practice that has the ability to translate the processes or the experiences I've transcended and then create potentially a route that would then create a life-enhancing narrative for other people. So I would say it's the unexpected thing. So it was about when I first started using a wheelchair, I felt I became invisible behind people's preconceptions about what it must mean to be within the wheelchair. And I didn't see many life-enhancing narratives at that point. That has changed a great deal more recently. So I was taking control of my modes of representation. And but the unexpected thing is the underwater aspect of what is now a fly dive wheelchair. Technically, it's an aircraft. I have an ordinary looking wheelchair that technically is a single seat deregulated aircraft that also goes underwater. And I haven't flown the wheelchair yet, but I have 150 hours as a flex wing microlight pilot as a way of breaking down the physical barriers I've experienced. But the unexpected thing, as I was saying to you before, is the underwater wheelchair is literally the best thing the best vehicle I have ever been in my life, because you have, particularly when you're looping, I mean, everyone says diving is like flying anyway, but there's something about being in that seated position, controlling using control surfaces, so hydroplanes, and the back elevator, the back tail fin, that enables you to control the way in which you move through water. And the unexpected thing has been the way in which it's gone out on a global scale. So when we last added up all the different, so for example, Global Informer, I think they had 15.6 million views when I last checked. And when we add all the different contexts in which the artwork has been used, particularly it's been used as part of the science fiction of human enhancement in the title and end sequence, I think we got to 433 million views. We don't know if they're individual views of the artwork, but that was back in 2018 before it went out 3 times on national radio in Australia. So the thing for me is I really feel the artwork has a life of its own, while it takes a great deal of focus and concentration and an ongoing process of bringing a team along with me, thinking through the ideas, and then gradually I'm only able to work when I have quite a high level of assistance. So the artwork draws really exceptional people to work with me over the years. My original dive team, Rob, the dive instructor, Rob Hughes of Sea Waves Diving, somebody else heard I was wanting to do this and I was going to be part of an outdoor festival, and they said, go and talk to Rob, I'm sure he'll work with you. So yeah, you see a wonderful side in people, Sarah Jane. That would be a really key element.
Brilliant. And I think you've experienced that also when you've gone into the flying community, haven't you? Right.
Yeah, sorry.
I think somebody even had the audacity to tell you no at one point, and that was all you needed.
Yes, it's been a key thing actually with the underwater wheelchair. Once I got a small pot of funding, I thought, well, I better ask, I'm just an artist, I better ask some engineers to check out my ideas. And they were saying, no, that won't work. And I think in retrospect, what they meant is, why would you want to do that? And the same, slightly different, when I started the flight training, it really I hadn't been aware that I have motor coordination issues in my hands as well. So when you're flying a paratrike, you really have to, and particularly when you're reverse, you're basically launching the wing from behind you. On a paramotor where you have the propeller and engine on your back, you cross your lines, and you're looking at the wing as you bring it up, so you can see it and control, and you just step sideways. Whereas when you're launching on wheels, so a trike is a much more sensible shape than a wheelchair, by the way, because it's nice and low to the ground. When you're launching a wing from behind you, you're not seeing where your hands are in space. So it was at the point at which I could see the wing was kept on going off to the right, and then my instructor was flying. I could see him flying the wing and watching and checking all the lines and everything were untangled, because if you get a tangled line, it can set the wing off to one side. And I was watching him doing that, and I was thinking, that wing is flying perfectly and it must be me. So luckily I had a dashboard camera on the trike you saw in the footage that I was training in. And we looked very carefully at the dashboard camera, and you could see one of my arms was dropping, and I didn't know. And actually the reason I roll in that footage is I go to do wrong hand. I go to kill, I'm trying to work out which way. I go to kill the footage with I go to kill the power with my the thumb stop as I'm coming into land, and in the footage my hand comes right up, which means you're completely I'm actually not managing to rotate it. It's my left hand that comes up in reality, but I think it's twisted on the footage. So my left hand, I'm using a hand throttle, and there's a power switch on the hand throttle with your left hand. And in the footage you see, as I could have sworn my hands were down by my waist. So my first instructor did say, you're never going to do this, and if you do, you'll die. But the point is, the thing about acquiring impairment, so when I say I'm disabled, I'm using the social model. So I'm talking about the barriers, mental, physical, attitudinal, physical, practical, that I face in life. Whereas when I'm talking about my impairments, I'm talking about the physical and cognitive aspects that affect my ability to deliver, or are shaping my ability to deliver the artwork and our core to it, because I'm exploring a particular embodiment and how I can achieve the goal of creating imagery that might have the power to transform preconceptions through, but it's the actual physical limitations or physical impairments that are then shaping that. So basically I discovered I don't know where my hands are in space when I don't see them, and we found basically a flex wing microlight. You are using a bar, it's weight shift, and you're using a bar so you can see your hands. And even with that, my instructor was going, can't you see the bar is at an angle? And I was going, nope, it looks level to me. And it's basically, I've got differential. So your brain overrides. If you're getting different sensation in each hand, your brain must even it up and tells you your hands are at the same level when they're not. And another pilot who was training with Flying for Freedom had a similar issue, that they take off and curve one way. But so I basically got my instructor to set the picture for me, and I said, look, I'm going to watch the picture, and we kept on doing it and kept on doing it. And basically I learned to fly that way, and in the same way lining up for the runway, what looks straight down the runway to me, you can see why my first instructor was concerned, because you have to go through a few stages to accommodate. But the difference is Flying for Freedom were set up to train wounded, injured and sick, serving and ex-service men and women to train to fly as part of a recovery process. And they heard about my work and kindly offered to allow me to do some training with them. And one thing led to another, and I ended up with the microlight license for a flex wing microlight. And so I'm still working on overcoming other barriers with access issues to be able to get back to training on the training on the paragliding style microlight that the underwater, the fly dive wheelchair, should I say, because it does both, flies under. So it's I think being told I can't do it is helpful in one way, because I just want to really check. You know, I was really prepared to believe the person who told me this, because they were very informed and they had my physical interest first and foremost at heart. So I knew they were absolutely doing it for the best of reasons. But it was, it's we touched on this when we spoke before, that through the artwork, I think there's 3 levels going on: primary, secondary and tertiary. And what people see as the artwork, I see as a 3rd level of the imagery that results. And I see the primary level is the process that happens if it's about transforming preconceptions and facilitating a more inclusive space, that's where people are able to respond directly to the particular set of needs of the person in front of them, and see the value of doing that because of the different perspectives it creates and the interest that might give those people in terms of expanding their view of the world. I call that the primary process that goes on. So there's this level where you have to almost work with the stereotypes. They almost become a material within the artwork, because the extent to which I'm able to transcend and find a way through them is the extent to which the artwork can exist. And so, if that helps.
Yes, absolutely. You can go on. You can go on. So we had one of the questions that we were asked for you was, how do marine life respond to you? How, when you're in the water, do you have a sense of the marine life, and can you see the marine life sensing you? We spoke about this as you described that the scuba kit is doing the same thing as the wheelchair, and put the two together, you're underwater, you have an extension of your own body, but you are interacting in a bigger system. Perhaps describe what you can see and sense and how you're sensing that.
So for the artwork, I dive without a mask, which many people would find too painful, particularly as waters come, you know, you're traveling through water. But because makes a positive of having had quite high levels of pain, that for the imagery I needed to take my mask off. In the very early footage, I've got goggles with sunglasses over, and we sorted that out. I basically, at one point, my instructor was saying you have to wear a mask, and I was saying, well, there's no point in creating the imagery then. So because the footage now is all created without a mask. Basically, I have learned to see fairly well underwater, but everything's still quite blurred. So it changes, it very much changes my experience, because from being visually orientated, it's a very physical experience of the water on my body. And because I have quite a lot of disturbance, sort of disturbed sensation and pins and needles, it's actually a wonderful feeling of being more embodied. I am flying underwater in a summer dress, and I do have a rash vest and a very very small shorty underneath that's the neck's cut away, so I do have some warmth, but it is pretty chilly. And because of the noise of going back to your question about how do other marine life react to me, I think the noise of the motors means that I don't see aquatic life close to me, but my videographer Dan Burton has this amazing ability to get down, so that because he's on scuba, he'll get the camera down between the coral and any aquatic life, say antheas or flying. So they fly up across the screen, and he captures the way they respond to me. They're hearing the sound and responding to that becomes part of the imagery. And there's one sequence where I'm flying across a deep blue sea, and these beautiful orange antheas come up right across the screen. So it's more, you do see a response in the artwork, but it's more because of the combination, the way in which the underwater wheelchair at that point interacts with the camera, and and therefore the aquatic life in between. So to summarize, it's a very physical, embodied experience, much more than I have generally in life. But it's about the dynamics and the way the water is impacting on my body, and the feeling, the forces as I'm looping, for example, or being very conscious of trying to make it look absolutely effortless. So there's this lovely reclining position. This is the back of the chair, and my legs are going that way. And if I get the balance perfect, I can just look like I'm floating along, and you get this. It's exquisite. What can I say? Literally nothing I've done. The only thing that comes slightly close is the free fall part of the 3 parachute jumps I did many years ago for acquiring impairments. And
you're amazing, but you not only want to undertake this work, but you want to share those embodied experiences. And I know you've started not only to engage in work where you've filmed underwater, for example, but you've got audiences in the water with you to experience some of that. You've brought them to your world just as much as you've taken them out. The next step, you're starting to work with new technology again. You're starting to work with 360 and immersive technology. Tell us about that and how you're translating that experience.
So it was part of the masters I completed at Plymouth University, and I was exploring the concept that the artwork is primarily conceptual. It's a conceptual artwork. So I would say thank you to you and all the audience, because if you're thinking and considering about a wheelchair underwater, you've become part of the artwork through that conceptual process, and particularly through, for example, the question you asked and so on. It's an iterative process. So I hear people's responses and it shapes the work further. But 360 therefore became important, because if the artwork is primarily exists in order to create a space that might transform preconceptions, then to transform preconceptions, you need to disseminate the work. But at the beginning, a key part of the artwork were live art events, where, as you said, we train people to dive, and apparently it's 10 times better to see the underwater wheelchair live underwater than in the footage. And so we developed a live art event. And by the way, the point of that live art event was it totally changed. It mediated the access to the imagery in a parallel way to the way your access to the world is mediated when you travel through the world in a wheelchair or need other forms of technology to support your existence in the world. So the freest object in that space was the wheelchair. But then we were talking about how do you mediate. So there's only ever a very small audience for those events, because a live art event, it's about being the audience becoming part of the artwork, using a non-traditional space, and particularly the conceptual underpinning. And so through exploring, but the 16:9 format, standard TV format, loses a lot of the immersive quality. So I was looking at trying to have a digital form of dissemination that had a more immersive quality. But also, as soon as I heard about the Oculus headset or VR type headsets, I'd lived the life of being very excluded from the world for about 6 years, really pretty much being bedbound. So I thought immediately, I would have loved to have access to the outside world virtually. And we developed some. I developed a research bit, digital R&D fund for the arts, where we built an affordable way of materializing. I call it real world 360. So you're physically surrounded in a very sculptural object that's double-sided. So you see, you enter a darkened space, and there's this tropical underwater world materialized either on a big tent-like structure that's 4 meters high, or the more affordable one is a 3 meter high cylinder by 12.5 meters in circumference. And so you see this tropical environment glowing in the darkened space. But the point is, you can then go inside the space, and you suddenly find there's a wheelchair, a woman in a wheelchair. The point is, it's about the wheelchair, not about the fact whether I'm in it. I originally was planning to ask someone else to do pilot the chair, but I realized I couldn't, because it was too developmental, and I couldn't expect somebody else to undertake those risks if I hadn't understood them myself.
That's right. You're a trained professional and you've worked really hard. These are not, so we're not advocating this for everyone.
No.
Willing to go and become qualified divers and to work to the extent that you have.
And have a real awareness of buoyancy control, because the wheelchair changes depth so quickly. Even the loop is a 5 meter change in depth, so you have to be really aware of lung overexpansion injuries and so on.
Yes.
So, but in the answer to your question, the next stage, if the triptych is underwater flying imagery of a wheelchair in space, having worked with VR headsets and created low-cost, affordable systems, to double-sided projection systems, so that you can experience the underwater world and the the aerial footage, which isn't a refined artwork yet. But so you can go into a space and experience both of those from the outside, but also on the inside. I think the natural development, which I know you've worked with as well, would be to use a planetarium format for imagery. If we could create imagery of a wheelchair in space, flying past the international, a section of the International Space Station.
Well, I know you're trying to make that happen. You've visited the Neutral Buoyancy Lab with NASA, and you've been in discussion with them about that possibility, and I think that's an extraordinary image. As you say, you don't need to go there. You don't want to put on a spacesuit. You still want to remain in your dress with a rebreather outside of the International Space Station, mock-up in the Neutral Buoyancy Lab, potentially even waving to the astronauts inside.
Yes, who are tethered, they're on the spacewalk, tethered to the International Space Station, and a wheelchair flies past off into space. I think in terms of creating a narrative about, I think there's a beer that talks about a beer that takes you to the place other beers don't. But I think that would be, if it proves possible, and it'll only prove possible to the extent where I'm able, or we are able, to create an expectation and a desire, and take people along on that journey. So it's a very rich and interesting and exciting process. And a tutor, Sarah Bennett, when I was doing my master's, said I had an autoethnographic practice. So, and it was so exactly right, because you work with your own experiences and find solutions, but in a way that generates outcomes that hopefully create a path for other people, in the way I'm benefiting from the enormous amount of work, for example, that was done in the UK in the 70s, when people were chaining themselves to railings. And I don't even have to think generally about drop curbs. Sometimes I might have to do a great big detour to find one, but the point is, generally they're standard now. So if the artwork, that it's only meaningful to me to the extent the imagery can create an empowering, life-enhancing narrative. That for me it was about acquiring impairments, but all of us have our own challenges to face, and so it's the power that we have when we look from a different perspective.
That's incredible. You're doing transformational work. There is still a lot of work to be done, and you're making a significant contribution, and you're not only your courage but your grace and your generosity to share that with us is so inspiring. We're going to conclude there with a final take of some of your work to take us out into the lunch break, and we're going to encourage people to ask their questions. We will be able to answer those live or get back to you via one of the chat forums. So thank you so much, Sue. You're an inspiration.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So are you.
Okay.